Hello and welcome to the Performance Roundtable. On this podcast, we were looking into all things performance related. Today, we are talking to performance nutritionist Christian Smith. We will delve into nutrition timing, carb loading, plus a deeper look into the profession and the future of nutritionists.
Yeah, cheers, mate. So I'm a registered sport nutritionist. I'm registered with the SENR. I feel like being registered with that kind of sets you apart a little bit, and just shows that you're sort of adhering to a strict code of practice. All of the information you're going to be passing off is going to be evidence-based, well-researched, and that's something I pride myself on, really making sure that I'm not giving out any sort of half-baked, dodgy information to anyone, hopefully. In my role, I work with a vast array of sports currently, everything from team sports, combat sports, to a fair few endurance athletes, which is my discipline, as well as being a nutritionist. Half decent distance runner as well. So yeah, I'm required to manage my own nutrition, and yeah, I wouldn't give the clients any less than I give myself, really. That's pretty much it. I also work as a lecturer at Canterbury Christchurch University, and I'm trying to branch things out to start some teaching elsewhere. I also work with a fair few young athletes, so I'm working on some government-led sport programs like the TAS scheme, which is run by Sport England. So via that, I work with some of their Olympic pathway athletes. So they get hold of them at a young age, and they try and give them an experience of what it's like to have a decent amount of sports science support before they get off to uni, and they're left to be a bit more independent. So with them, I manage their nutrition one-on-one as a consultant. And then I also go into the colleges where they attend, present to smaller groups of athletes, and run cooking classes with them. And the last project I work on, or the last one I'm going to mention, is I'm also an educator / consultant for a British Athletics youth talent pathway as well. So for that, I give educational talks, and similar to the work I do on TAS, I manage nutrition with a select group of guys, and see them every few months, check in, and just try and develop a bit more nutritional independence before they are potentially thrown into that world of elite sport, when they might not be seeing a nutritionist that regularly. So they need a fair amount of autonomy or independent thought about the foods they're choosing and the food they're eating, because obviously, even in some elite sports, you're not going to have a nutritionist on hand at every meal or at all times of the day to tell you what you need to eat. So I feel like that's something that guides my practice a lot, is trying to hand people information that they can use. Like, I'll work out macros, tell people meal plans, same as every other nutritionist, but I really want the athletes and the clients and the exercises that I work with to be taken away more knowledge than they came to me with, because otherwise they're just going to be staring at some numbers on a page, and I don't want them to have to work out for themselves what that looks like in real food. So I try and teach them a bit more about real foods and the nutrients within them.
No, that's great. So I want to unpack a bit there. Is obviously a lot of experience. We mentioned about the SCNR, is it? Makes we've got right.
Yeah.
So two things with that. Is that what you'd recommend most new nutritionists to go for, or would you recommend the master's route as well, or is it you have to do both?
So to get onto the SCNR, I believe you just need a postgrad qualification.
Okay.
It's always worth checking on the SCNR website.
We can fact check it, but
yeah. So I would advise registering with it if you are a nutritionist, particularly if you've got ideas of taking the career a long way and, say, working in professional sport, because a lot of the more like premier sporting institutions, people like English Institute of Sport, any of the Premier League clubs, they're going to be asking for at least a graduate SENR registration to employ you as a nutritionist.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So yeah, on top of what I said about it being a sort of hallmark to show that you know your stuff, yeah, employers are starting to ask for it more
Yeah,
and
again,
more.
I see it as a positive, especially for
Yeah, for sure.
nutrition. And I know in S&C, the UKSCA is becoming more of a gold standard, especially in majority applications.
Yeah.
With the SENR, is there regular sort of, I know with the physios, they have to do a CPD. Do the nutritionists do the same, or is it kind of more of a, you have this, here's some tools to progress and make sure you are doing it, or is there sort of a test you have to do?
Yeah, you're expected to take charge of your own CPD to an extent. They organise CPD events, which are always brilliant. Like they always have really good speakers, top
Yeah.
people in the field, like from all over the world, come into the UK on a normal year that isn't affected by COVID. There's one of their events that I'm going to later on today online, actually. But the way it's managed is that there are different levels of registration. So the first one that I registered with coming out of my master's was the SENR graduate registration, which I'm still currently on at the minute. And then after 3 years of being on that, which I'm coming to the end of, you're required to register or upgrade your registration to being a practitioner in their eyes. So you have to do a much more in-depth proving of your competencies, if you like, and write an extended case study with someone you've worked on to prove to them that you have like increased your knowledge and increased your workload and that sort of stuff in the last few years since getting on the graduate register. So they do keep track of like making sure that us lot are staying current and engaging with the field, if you like. You can't just get the registration and then sit on it and just use it on all your work forever.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. And I think something like the reps and the PTs should really be following suit, because you can get a PT qualification and that's done for life. So things do change in the industry, and something that might you like say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, eating after 6 was a bad thing. And that's changed.
Yeah,
Whether that was a bad thing, but a lot of
yeah,
people thought it was a bad thing.
yeah. No, I still get that so
Yeah.
much. Like, yeah,
Um,
it's tricky.
yeah. So
But yeah, yeah, sure.
carry on.
No, I was just gonna say, like you said, whether it be S&C or coaching or nutrition, it's such a transient field and stuff's evolving all the time. Like, and most of the time, there are positive developments being made. So it is important to kind of check in on people that are registered with your body and make sure that they haven't been left behind and sort of passing off the old-fashioned information. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to move on. We'll start off with some just tips and common themes you have with your clients, athletes, that you think most people can benefit from.
Yeah. Right. So I actually wrote down the five sort of main things when I'm working with clients that come up. And this actually, whether this is just somebody that's in the gym, like a physique athlete, or runners, throwers, team sports players, these are things that just come up over and over again, just across all of those fields. And I'll just read them out and then I'll go into them like in a little bit more depth. So the things I came up with were consistency, timing, planning, treating your diet like a performance diet, and then protein and protein timing. I'll sort of go through them in a random order just because I've got them written down randomly, but particularly like protein timing, I often find that I have to really unpack how to feed protein throughout the day with an athlete. Because obviously, unlike other nutrients, unlike carbs and fats, it's not stored. So it's much more important to sort of pulse it, as sometimes it's said, throughout the day. So getting it in a portion of like 0.25 to 0.3 grams per kilogram, spread sort of every couple of hours, and making sure you're getting a serving of that size after training sessions, at breakfast, and then before you go to bed, as well as at meals. I'd say they're the key times to get that protein in. So just dialing in on that timing, just because personally, I think that will help you recover so much better, helps you feel fuller throughout the day. So that's really important.
On that, I think it's quite interesting so I know fasting's becoming more and more popular. Myself is like, I like to leave my calories a bit later on. Would you recommend just having some protein sources? So like wake up, have some yogurt, some maybe a shake, or maybe just some chicken, whatever your protein source is, without the carbs or the fats, just so you can save the calories on? Or would you recommend just having full meals?
It's a tricky one, because I know that for a number of goals, but thinking about weight loss particularly, or like body composition management, intermittent fasting can work really nicely for a lot of people. And if it's going to help you get into that calorie deficit, it's just another tool, another technique that you've got in your toolbox you can use. Saying that, I always kind of champion eating over not eating, but I would say still having the protein, like you say, on waking is a good idea. Just because if you imagine if you think of it like an up and down wave, your protein synthesis and protein breakdown throughout the day fluctuates around this like midline, and all the while you're above that line, you're building protein and synthesizing new proteins, and all the while you're below that line, you're breaking down the protein you've got, because it's not really stored in the body. So if you think about overnight, when you've got that massive overnight fast, you're going to go probably quite a long way into protein breakdown, because that's what your body is using while you're asleep in that overnight fast period to keep itself running predominantly. So when you wake up, just doesn't have to be a massive portion of protein, just something between 10 and 20 grams, just to get you back in that like protein synthesis zone, I think is really important. And for that reason, I'd say that's why that portion of protein is important before you go to bed too, just because it spikes protein synthesis, so sort of gives you more of that protein synthesis spike, so that the impact of the overnight fast isn't quite so severe. Like, obviously, if you're an athlete that, say you're doing multiple daily sessions and you train in the evening and then you've got to train again in the morning, you don't want to come off the evening session, then go really into your protein breakdown and then train again in that state in the morning. Like, there's benefits of training fasted, but that's another ball game entirely. But you don't just want to consistently be going into that breakdown.
Of course,
I think I'd say it's more important to get it throughout the day, even if you are going to be fasting off other nutrients. But it's sort of, I'd say it's more, or like it's less consequential to have carbs and fats in sort of a few hours in the day, if you like. So it's not like one of the other ones I listed out in the list, timing, that's a similar thing really. But if I switch on to thinking about carbohydrates rather than proteins, when you finish training, I think, even though there isn't that magic anabolic window that people used to talk about, like if you don't get something in within 30 minutes, you've like your gains are gone. That's not true, obviously, but I'd still say there's great importance and great value in taking a source of nutrition on as soon as you tolerably can after a training session. So you might blast a massive weight session or a massive session on the track and feel a bit sick, but as soon as your stomach feels like it can accept like liquid or solid nutrition, get some food in. Like,
what would you recommend, sort of like carbs, protein, is there anything?
so I think even though for some athletes it may seem a bit sort of counterintuitive, carbs I think are so important. Like a piece of research I saw mentioned by another nutritionist a couple of weeks ago, but it's something we've known for a while anyway, is that a big weight session can reduce your muscle glycogen, so your stored carbohydrate, by like 40%, which is like, that's similar to going out for a decent length run. So rather than thinking I've just got to smash some protein after this, having carbs and protein, I would say, is the really important thing, just to restock the glycogen stores, and that will help sort of prevent an injury the next time you train, and yeah, it just helps your recovery. So thinking in terms of numbers, it should be 2-to-1 carbs to protein in or after a typical training session, or 3-to-1 carbs to protein after a really hard session. And then if it's a really easy session, so you're doing some very, very light cardio work or just like mobility stuff, probably protein alone is just fine.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, just like simple stuff. I know that people might mix up a shake that's got like carb powder and protein powder in it, that's fine, but just like 400 mils of chocolate milk,
Yeah, I've seen
just like a
some.
ready.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We used to, when we was at college, that's what we used to always drink after get trained. Not
yeah,
because there's any research behind it. It's had a bit of protein. I think the guys was like the
yeah,
milk. So Tesco's chocolate milk and some chicken thighs. That was kind of the go-to back in
yeah.
college.
But yeah, like chocolate milk fits the ratio well,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's such a convenient one. Like, and it, you can go as almost as cheap as you want with it. You
Okay.
just, like, if you do want it to have those recovery benefits, you've got to make sure it is the one that has a decent amount of sugar or a decent amount of carbs in it,
Yeah.
because you can get the ones that are like for goodness shakes, which are
Yeah. It tastes
just
horrible.
protein.
Yeah, them ones.
But yeah, what else? I'm sort of covering other things, planning ahead.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean making a huge macro plan for yourself. That's not necessarily necessary, but just thinking, at least knowing what you're going to have for the next meal or the next 2 meals in the day or after your workout, you'll help yourself out so much in terms of like your food availability after a session. So
Yeah.
with my young athletes, I'd always say try and keep, like, say, a long life bottle of chocolate milk in your training bag, or like a box of cereal bars or a couple of protein bars or something like that. So if you go to the gym in the middle of the day when you're not necessarily expecting to, you just feel like you need to get a session in, then afterwards, you know that you've got ready to go recovery nutrition in your bag. Like, you don't have to worry about going to Tesco to find some product. So yeah, plan ahead. Like,
No,
expect.
that's really good, because I had a client actually last night speaking, and we were speaking of the diet, and they said that they had a massive, like a big Burger King Whopper, and then we were actually speaking about how come you had it. It was like, because it's late from work. I know it's a bit different circumstances.
Yeah,
But we actually come together and said, why don't we plan meals before we come back home, so we know we can have a meal like without
yeah,
trying to get home. So maybe pre-cooked
Yeah.
meals, or like you said, focus on some calorie availability. That way, and like I said, cereal bars that don't go out of date are pretty useful.
Yeah.
You don't need moldy food in your fridge, in your kit bag. That's
No.
never
No.
never good.
No. So yeah, just thinking about it like that, or even something I've used with endurance athletes before, but it's relevant to any sport really. Like you were saying, if someone gets home late from a training session, your first thought's probably going to be getting showered and getting on the sofa. But like a smoothie in the fridge will last pretty much all day. So
Yeah,
if you've got the time, prep up a smoothie with some oats, Greek yogurt, berries, so that you can bridge that gap between the training session and whatever you're doing afterwards. Even if it's between the training session and dinner, still get the recovery nutrition in between it. And you know that you've got this pre-prep smoothie in the fridge,
yeah,
or
of course, yeah.
just be inventive with it, like overnight oats, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, you don't need a nutritionist to tell you decent recipes for smoothies and overnight oats. Like as long as it's got a bit of yogurt, some oats in it, you can sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
customize it with whatever else you want.
That's pretty much it,
You
really.
make it a bit more carb heavy by adding some juice or something like that. That's
Yeah.
still good. But yeah, try and think a couple of meals ahead.
That's
And
great.
like with not necessarily, I won't go on a tangent about carb loading because I know we'll probably come on to that later on.
Yeah,
But thinking about when you're in a normal competition season, say different to this year, say if you've got a rugby game 10 a.m. on a Saturday, like on Friday afternoon, Friday evening, you should be thinking about that game and thinking about nutrition that's going to feed into that match, particularly if you know that you don't like eating very much in the morning. So like maybe on the match day -1, having a decent carb rich lunch based around complex carbs, then a fairly carb heavy meal in the evening, like pasta bolognese, something like that, just because that's going to have an overnight effect on your glycogen stores and on your carbohydrate stores, which could help your performance when kickoff is when we're back to normal competition. But yeah, thinking about preloading glycogen stores and getting enough carbs in, that's not just the reserve of endurance athletes. It's sort of relevant to most sports, really.
Yeah, I do think that anyone can utilize carb loading, but I think that a lot of
Yeah,
times carb loading is saved for big marathon races, and like
yeah,
everyone always thinks it was really long distance sort of stuff. And then any carb loading done before games is normally like one big meal the morning of, or the morning. They don't really put much attention into it.
yeah,
It's just something that's a phrase that's used.
yeah,
Carb loading, I'm gonna have a pasta meal before the game. Or do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think it's still that kind of, we know what it is, but we don't know how to do it properly for a lot of people.
yeah. Because it's almost like a bit of a joke that's chucked around in the changing rooms.
Yeah, make
Like,
sure you carb load
see
for
someone
tonight. Yeah.
smashing some bananas, like, yeah, I'm carb loading.
Yeah, of
But
course. Especially when it's a
yeah,
slightly overweight guy. It's like, yeah, don't worry, I'm having some beers. I'm carb loading. Don't
carb
worry.
loading, carb loading. Yeah,
No, we're going to go a bit carb loading a bit later. We're going to carry
yeah.
on with your sort of tips we've got so far: timing, planning,
So we got
and
timing,
protein.
protein timing, planning ahead. The next one, which I'd say is massive, which I try and one of the first things I try and instill with the younger athletes is consistency. Just like, don't let yourself down with a lack of consistency. And the thing I say with pretty much every athlete I work with is try and stick to this like rule of 3 with meals. And it sounds a bit corny, and I borrowed it from an American dietitian who's a NCAA dietitian that I saw on YouTube.
Okay.
And this rule of 3 is just trying to make sure that 3 meals a day you're having a source of starchy carbohydrates, some lean proteins, and then something colorful. So if you do that, have those 3 components and repeat that for your 3 main meals in the day, you can make sure that your diet is sort of fairly well balanced, even if it hasn't been tweaked in terms of exact amounts of macros and things like that. You know that you're getting a good variety of those things. So it doesn't always have to be, say, like chicken, broccoli, and rice,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
classic
And does
gym meal. But
something colourful count for Haribo as well? Yeah, that's what I mean. It means Haribo.
oh, I, I
And
always say that. Like
yeah,
that's such a common question. Like,
yeah,
no, it's
um,
got something naturally
yeah. Naturally
colourful.
good.
So
That's
like
fine. No, but again,
berries,
that is
anything.
a good sort of way of looking at it. 'Cause I know a lot of people use the 80-20 rule or the 70-30 rule. I think that
Yeah,
way of looking at it actually dials it down to what we need to get that 70%. Because people say, oh, it's 70 or 80%, we need to be good food or good quality food. We're not really kind of like giving any sort of indicators of what that is. And I know a lot of people can
yeah,
describe healthy food or good food different ways. Like some people think granola is really good and has a lot of benefits. Some people might not like think granola
yeah,
is not as good because how many calories it is. But like I said,
yeah.
then is I think if we focus on what we're eating, the quality first, we can dial back the quantity depending on the goal or increase the quantity depending on
Yeah,
the goal.
sure. Yeah, so just making sure that consistency is there. Just
Yeah.
like I said, 3 balanced meals during the day. It's amazing how many athletes I work with that aren't doing that, and it's like they can't work out why they're not progressing with their goals, and they're just like they're probably not just on basic terms. They're just not getting enough calories. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
so making sure they have 3 decent meals, couple of decent snacks.
Other
Yeah, it's
than
just
seeing someone like you,
basic.
would you recommend players go to kind of find their? 'Cause a lot of people using the watches and stuff like that. Where would you recommend a more, but like more accurate way of finding the calories? Because than just going off an iPhone. Kind of they can be a bit skewed sometimes. Or do you think they're good enough to
Oh,
give a broad um, example, at least an idea?
so there's one that I've seen that is fairly decent is the precision nutrition macro calculator.
Okay.
That will tell you overall energy and sort of give you a macro split as well. Um, like I'm not sure what equation it is they use, because like you can use 5 different equations
So
and
I've used
get
Schofield
5.
in the past.
Yeah, yeah. Schofield's a decent one. Yeah, if you feel like getting mathematical about it, Schofield's pretty decent. Cunningham, but for Cunningham, you have to have an idea about your body composition. So you need to know like your approximately what body fat you are. There's another one which I use quite a lot with clients, which is the 10 half and vice, it's called, equation. It's quite a new one. It's just from 2014, but it marries up quite nicely with other equations that are based on like body comp from DEXA. So I use
Okay.
that one. Um, but yeah, the watches are tricky.
Yeah,
Like
got
it's difficult to know. Yeah, obviously I use mine a lot for running, and I don't know. Like the calorie burn is always
yeah.
weird.
I've seen
Like
some people and they've burnt like 1,000 calories in the gym session, and I've been a bit
yeah,
skeptical about that. Like unless they're doing some real intense gym session. A
yeah,
little tangent on that. I'm actually on body fat. Is
yeah,
now with runners, body fat I reckon is very important because you need to as minimal weight as possible because there's no benefit of having the extra weight. If I'm wrong, correct me. There's obviously some, but there's no performance benefit in terms of speed. It's just dead weight. Whereas in terms like rugby, some of the weight could be beneficial. How much do you rely on um, body fat percent scores, or do you look at the performance scores as well if you're going to indicate whether someone should lose weight or not, or do you have that conversation with the coach? That makes sense.
I try to keep it athlete centered,
Okay.
just because sometimes the coach will have very different ideas about the shape that an athlete needs to be in.
Yes, of course, yeah.
And yeah, sometimes that doesn't quite marry up with what's achievable for them. I actually don't rely on body fat too much. I use it a bit, and I use some of 8 skin folds to track progress,
Yeah.
just to see what's going on. Yeah, I don't actually use it too much.
Do you see?
Sometimes,
Carry on.
I was going to say, sometimes too much, obviously coming from running myself, I feel like it's obsessed over.
Yeah.
Like, I know some, well, I'm sure everyone does, but I know some sort of fairly middle of the road, really skinny runners, and I know some bigger guys that are really excellent runners,
Yeah, yeah.
who are like carrying a lot of muscle. But people like, I know that in the past we've discussed people like Nick Bear.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know, who I'm sure a lot of your subscribers are aware of him as well. Like, he's obviously pretty low body fat, but he's carrying a lot of overall
Mass.
weight,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Big boy.
he can still shift massively.
Yeah.
Like,
He's a
he can
freak.
run faster than some of the guys I know that are like
Yeah,
55, 60 kilos like me.
he's
It's
he's
so,
definitely a freak. But yeah,
so yeah, yeah.
no, sorry, I keep you interrupting us. Carry
No,
on.
it's all right. No, I was just going to say that weight is, yeah, I'd say in running, it's probably obsessed over a bit too much. And we're starting to move on as a culture from that idea that lighter is better,
Yeah,
which, like you say, you don't want too much fat. But I mean, there are probably scores of runners that have absolutely wrecked themselves to the point at which they can't do any sort of sport now just because of that obsession. And
yeah.
it's about striking a balance, which isn't an easy balance to strike. But
Yeah, of course. It's when we bring in these new metrics in, I think that we're always gonna have that transition period where we're kind of testing, is this going to be useful? Like we had acute chronics in S&C, which was all the range, and now it's kind of dying off a bit and people are using it different ways.
yeah,
When I've seen skin folds used, it's not really for us as practitioners. It's more for the coaches and the athletes to kind of prove we are doing something. I've seen it as to show to them. Sometimes they
yeah,
don't realize they are losing fat, maybe, or um,
yeah,
some people want a physical representation of what they've done. I know that with the, like strength testing, me going to someone, he's increased his bench, then me showing someone he's got 10 kg in his bench, it gives that kind of realism, and to coaches, they can see that you're doing a job, sort of thing, rather than just
yeah,
relying on he feels better. That's more subjective. I don't know if that's what you see as well, or
yeah. Yeah. No, I do get that. Like, especially working with clients that don't feel like they're making progress as quickly as they would maybe like to,
yeah,
and just, yeah, sometimes it can be a useful one to get there, or like to keep them adhering, if you like. Because I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago with Josh Schofield, who is a young running coach, really good running coach.
yeah.
He's going to do big things in the future, I'm sure. He's a ex Leeds Met boy like we are.
What podcast was that on?
It was on Trackster podcast,
Okay, all right.
which is it's a running one. But yeah, he was raising that same point, how like as a practitioner, he was specifically talking about nutrition, because he does some nutrition as well. How it's a field where it's so difficult to sort of prove that you are making a difference. Like,
Yeah,
because sometimes it can take a really long time, and like, you can't easily display someone's internal health for them,
yeah, cool.
really.
Yeah,
And
cool.
unless you've got, like, if you're someone like me, or probably the majority of nutritionists, you don't easily have the access to send someone for a blood panel even
Yeah, yeah,
every like 8 to 10 weeks. So whereas in organizations with a lot of funding, or in the NCAA in America or something,
Yeah.
whereas they might be able to get blood work done to say, look, I've increased your calcium and vitamin D by X amount, so the diet's working. Here it's like it relies so much on faith, which can be really,
Yeah, it can be very
like, it can be
scary.
tricky. So yeah, the skin fold calipers can sometimes help a bit with that.
Yeah. And I think things like you see these sort of people do vegan diets and they do these certain diets and they're always saying, oh, in 2 weeks I felt amazing. I think that's kind of creating that
Yeah,
false expectation that you're going to change something in your diet
yeah,
and you're
yeah,
going to feel amazing in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, when sometimes, like you said,
yeah,
if your diet is already pretty decent or it needs a few tweaks, you might not feel as noticeable.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Um,
So like you say, someone transitioning into a vegan or even something like a gluten-free diet,
yeah,
um, they might start to feel amazing. And don't get me wrong, it might, like with gluten-free, it might be because they've got an intolerance, fair enough, but it might just be because they've taken the rubbish out of their diet.
yeah, yeah. It's what they've taken
Like,
out a little down.
so you you can make so much. Yeah, like the worst position you're coming from to start with,
Yeah, yeah,
obviously, the more gains you're going to make at the start.
yeah. Of
So
course, yeah. That's great.
tricky.
So have you got any more of them top tips? Was that it?
I think I've pretty much covered them. Apart from, yeah, I think the last one I had on there was just like performance diet, which is quite a general one, but it's uh, just, I don't know what the best way to explain it is. So a lot of people, when they start training, that's if they're not necessarily coming from an athletic background, um, they feel like there has to be a complete wholesale change of their diet, which, like, maybe over time their diet may change to being irrecognizable to what it was before, but nothing has, like, you don't have to change everything all at once, which is what I guess I'm trying to say. So
Yeah,
by thinking about it like a performance diet, you first of all think about your training days, and you think about your hardest training day, and you make sure you eat a nice balanced diet on those days. And then once you've got your hardest days nailed, you go to your easy training days and you nail the nutrition for those. And before you know it, you're starting to establish that consistency, like I spoke
yeah,
about before. Like, you don't have to sit down, look at your whole training plan and be like, right, day one of new diet. Think
yeah,
about
yeah,
it like, that's my hardest session. I'm going to make sure my recovery nutrition is perfect for that. And then just widen that scope from there outwards. And then before you know it, you're supporting yourself and making loads of progress. Yeah. I can't write enough meal plans to supply the food for the rest of someone's life. And
yeah,
they don't, they don't want to eat the same 7 days of meals for the
yeah.
next
You could be
60 years. So
Christian
yeah.
Smith, Hello Fresh. That's going to be your new branding.
Yeah.
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 So that's great. So then 5 little tips. I think most people can benefit from them, even coaches when they're implementing um,
Yeah.
their stuff with their clients, and also with yourself looking to improve your own nutrition. Then 5 little
Yeah.
things is a nice little start before you want to maybe take another step further and go to someone like yourself and get an in-depth
Yeah.
nutrition analysis. We're going to go on some questions now that I had on from the Instagram. So the
Yeah.
first one is regarding healthy fats. So if you want to define how you define healthy fats, but the question is how do you change your fat ratios around training? So on a training day, non-training
Okay.
day, and then a match slash post-match sort of day, and if you do, or if it's not that important, or
Okay. So if we start off by thinking about healthy fats, so healthy fats, I'd say predominantly unsaturated fats. So the sort of fats that come from plant-based sources, probably, predominantly unsaturated. I've just said that, but let's say nutritionist favorite, I'm sure avocado, things like that, avocado, oils, nuts, seeds, even even dairy fats aren't too bad, to be honest. Like you don't want to be having too much cream and that sort of stuff, but say the fat in whole milk isn't too bad for you, really.
Yeah.
So if you think about it on the different sorts of training days that you might have, on a harder training day, I'd say fat in most of the athletes I work with and for my own diet is typically lower, just because it makes way for more carbohydrate and protein.
Yeah.
But then saying that, I'd still try and make sure I'm getting it into meals. So whether that be a bit of olive oil on a salad, avocado in a sandwich, or like in eggs for breakfast,
Yeah.
something like that. So making sure it's there. On easier training days or rest days, typically for the opposite reason, fat is typically higher because you're not having as much carbohydrate in your meals because you're not fueling up for a training session. So you might replace that with some other sources of healthy fats. Say like, in your morning cereal, you might have a bit less cereal and a few more seeds and nuts on it, just to change up the ratio a little bit. The times when I would really sort of limit fats would be on competition days, before competition, that is. So you might think about it the evening before competition and on the morning of the competition itself. So fats take a long time to digest compared to carbohydrate. So if you have too much fat in the build up to competition, it can delay your digestion overall. And particularly if you're going onto the rugby field still trying to digest like a big oily plate of eggs and sausages, you might find that you have some stomach issues and you're not necessarily going to get the best out of yourself.
Yeah, I won't tell you my pre-game ritual of three sausage rolls before the game, one after the game. That probably not the best.
Mate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I'd say. So still got to make sure fats are there on most days, or on every day that isn't competition day. But fats are often neglected by athletes because of that old thought that fat makes you fat, and it really doesn't. Like the wrong amount and the wrong types of foods might make you put on fat, but healthy fats, they have such a wealth of health benefits that you've got to keep them there.
So two things from that is, do you follow a carb cycling approach but not a calorie cycling approach? Are generic, or do you also fluctuate calories as well? Because I know people get them confused a lot, where they think they drop their carbs but don't replace them with the fats, which then obviously equals lower calories. Whereas if you want to keep the constant fats or constant calories, then you might have to carb cycle rather than calorie.
That's a really important point. I think that is a mistake that is made a lot, is to let your calories drop too much on a rest day. And it's so important to still roughly keep your overall energy intake the same. Like it can drop a little bit because you're not eating as much around training, and your appetite might not be quite so high, but just trying to make sure you are replacing that carbohydrate you've got less of with the protein. It's a general point for rest days, just trying to keep your calories up, particularly if you're an athlete that trains a lot. It's not like, it might be a rest day for you, but for your body it's like a repair day. So it's still going to need all of that energy to rebuild. So particularly working with some younger athletes on their rest day, they're probably shattered and might sleep until midday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they might have missed like 700-800 calories throughout the morning.
Yeah.
So the next hard training day, which might be the following day after the rest day, they're still shattered just because they've got like 1,000-calorie hole in what they usually eat. So paying
Yeah.
attention to energy intake is so
I
important.
think it was on one of the lectures we had during the masters. I think it was with Louise, and way she kind of
Yeah,
justified it was that you are technically still carb loading on your rest days because you're doing less work. So rather than
yeah,
think you have to lower the
yeah,
calories, is that, well, by just lowering the expenditure, you still carb loading that way, kind
yeah,
of thing,
yeah,
because you're doing less. So like, for example, if you do a run through on a Friday, you're still training, but you're not going to be as intense as a Tuesday or Wednesday session.
yeah,
So
for sure.
that's kind of
Yeah,
where you technically are always carb loading. So you don't really need to,
yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. But
Yeah. I know that triathletes particularly use that approach a lot.
yeah,
Like they don't really carb load. Like you say, it's just because their carb intake is chronically high.
yeah, yeah,
So when they taper their training down going into a race, they'll naturally be priming those glycogen stores just because, like, yeah, they're
you
having
would,
more
yeah.
carbohydrate than they need. So yeah,
Yeah, you said it
but yeah,
better
it's a
than
good point.
said it better than me. But so the second point on that sort of the fats was, you said
Yeah,
about not having too much fats before a meal, so probably before a game.
yeah,
I know a lot of players that I've dealt with, they have like a big pasta bake or a pizza, or
yeah,
you sort
yeah,
of a lot of Italian food basically, or like a curry where it's
yeah,
very high fats with the meals. Um, and this is the same post match where you can say different things, but what would you, what would you have instead then? Is it just don't think of it as carb loading as meals? I think some nutritionists say having extra like a malt loaf or a bagel, just have it as
yeah,
extra food rather than going, oh, we need to
yeah,
make it higher calorie meals. Have your normal
yeah,
meals and then have extra carbs, or is there sort of
yeah,
ways you deal with that?
yeah. For someone with a big appetite, I could say that like adding in extra sources of carbs is like that's a great idea. As rather than making your meals too big, because they, like, people with bigger appetites don't seem to have so much of a problem with that grazing type of eating. I know that when I carb loaded for London Marathon, when I did it a few years ago, I didn't mind just like snacking on bagels throughout the day. So like between meals, I'd clear a bag of bagels like a couple of days beforehand. But then I know people with very, very small appetites that just wouldn't work. So you've got to find like more inventive ways of getting it in. So like getting it in liquid form. But back to the question, digress slightly. I'd say, yeah, even though it's probably not what some guys would want to hear, is change up those habits. Like I've dealt with cyclists before that used to carb load with fish and chips, which is just like it twisted
Yeah.
my melon. Like like it's just like
fish fish Fridays.
there's such, like, I feel like there's just such a kick of fat in it that you're going to spend the majority of the evening digesting the fat, and then all of the carbohydrates going to hit you like probably while you're asleep, and
Yeah, yeah,
by the time the next day comes around, it probably won't have much of it left. So yeah, I'd say keep the meal the evening before competition, even if you're not competing until the afternoon, pretty low fat. So if you're having a pasta dish, still keep it fairly healthy, but just have like a really decent amount of pasta, maybe some garlic bread as well. But just like limit the cheese on it,
yeah,
and have it with some like a tomato-based pasta sauce with some chicken.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Decent amount of pasta with it is what I would advise. Or like curry. I'd probably say curry is one of the things I would save for afterwards, like
Maybe more like a
after
biryani
competition.
beforehand, which would be a bit less sauce,
Yeah,
a bit
yeah,
more.
less sauce, or like a tomato-based curry, like a
Yeah,
buna, something like that. Um,
yeah,
and same with pizza. Like I know pizza is a pretty popular choice for pre-competition. It's also useful when athletes are traveling, because
Yes.
particularly if they're traveling abroad for fixtures and things like that. It's another thing that I think it was Louise that we mentioned, spoke about when we were on the Masters, like wherever you are in the world, you can usually guarantee on getting a pizza, and it's probably
Yeah.
going to be fairly safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, the only thing is, again, I'd probably either remove some of the cheese or ask for it without all the cheese.
Ask for 3 cheeses, not
Just
4.
yeah, 3 seasons rather than 4.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, just places like Franco Manca, pizzerias like that. It's not so bad because they don't, like, it tends to be better quality mozzarella, which is
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
be a bit easier on your stomach and less of it. But probably like Domino's Meat Feast, something like that, I would save for
Post.
afterwards. Not, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think which with pizzas is eat more like traditional Italian pizzas where it's less cheese, more like
yeah,
less cheese rather
yeah,
than the
yeah, for
American
sure.
UK style where it's like deep
Yeah,
dish
yeah,
and full of
yeah,
cheese. But it's maybe a bit more same with the pastas as well, maybe a bit more traditional,
yeah,
rather than kind of what
yeah, definitely.
our sort of taste buds are used to.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, if you can't limit yourself for one meal to get the best out of yourself in competition, you need to have a word with yourself,
Yeah,
I think.
but back to that
But
consistency.
yeah, you can still. It's like with anything in a diet. Like you can make most things healthy, and it's just about adapting the foods to the to what time it is and like
Yeah, of
what
course, yeah.
you've got coming up. Like you can pretty much adapt everything as long as you're prepared to do it.
Yeah, and obviously
So
accept that it's not going to taste as good, but is it good enough?
yeah,
Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah,
but that's fine. Yeah, it's great. But
yeah,
on that, I think a lot of people, especially hard gainers, go through is that kind of the lean bulking slash like eat out everything. I've done the same. I told people just to eat because they can't put weight on. Like
yeah,
I said about before the conversation about where the player lost a lot of weight and he was just like, I'm having chip butties tonight. Is that okay? And I was like, yes, you lost so much weight. We need you to just eat. One is, do you think there's a place for that in people's diets? And two, how do we go from starting with that, if that is okay, to progress into better choices in the long run, kind of like accepting a bit of a downfall to kind of progress to a better outcome, the lesser of two evils? Or would you kind of just say, I'd rather be lighter but eating better? Yeah.
yeah. It's always a tricky dilemma, that, because as a nutritionist, obviously I would prefer that they're going to be maintaining their weight and staying pretty much around the weight that they want to be.
Mm.
But then for the sake of their health, we also have a duty of care to make sure that they're eating decent stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a real gray area, but I think you can turn a blind eye to a bit of that if you know that someone is on the first steps to getting their nutrition back on track.
Yeah.
And if seriously that's the only thing they're going to eat, it's better than them going hungry.
Yeah,
But
of course, yeah.
then say in that circumstance, like if he's going to a chippy, I'd I'd, I'd probably say like have a fish butty instead.
Yeah, okay.
Like
So
try and get something with protein in, just so that you are varying the sources of macros in there.
yeah, because it's pure carbs and fat.
Yeah, so that's what I would immediately try and
Yeah.
move a player like that away from. They're the sort of players as well that I would probably devote a bit more time to, even sort of without getting any sort of payback or stuff like that, just to try and explore other options and see if there are other things that they might be able to get the ball rolling and start preparing, even if their cooking skill isn't that great.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
even if they can just whip together like a basic chicken stir fry, even if it's just noodles, chicken, sweet chili sauce, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it can be a real process depending on what kind of player you're dealing with.
And I think with
Um,
players like that, it's sometimes just the idea of, like you said, they like a stir fry. They might not have thought of that, and it's
no,
these little simple things that, like you said, people like yourself can just implant into their sort of diets, where it's like, oh,
yeah,
that takes 5 minutes. It's like probably faster than driving to the chippy, and that you can be kind of
yeah.
rationalize a bit more.
That's also where I would try and get them to think about that performance diet I was talking about as
Yeah,
well. Like where you might be able to say to them, okay, your evening meal isn't perfect yet, but what you've got to nail is as soon as that whistle blows for the end of the session, you've got your little bottle of chocolate milk there, or you've got your banana and your protein bar there, so that even if other stuff still, or your nutrition later on still needs work, you know that you're doing everything you can immediately post exercise to help yourself recover. Um, so yeah, starting with pre and post the session, and then just building outwards from there, and then getting into the sort of meals that they can make. But trying to keep the chippy for after a match on a Saturday or
yeah.
Sunday,
Okay, like so
ideally.
it's like they're not really a cheat day. Like it's more of a performance day, kind of recovery day. That's like change the focus to. If
Yeah,
you do agree with that, it's kind of, so I know people can see that kind of like cheat. I went through the same, where my first ever diet slash training, I was obsessed. It was 7 days till cheat day, 6 days till cheat day, 5 days till cheat. And then like,
yeah,
I'd eat my food, I'd eat a pizza,
yeah,
like, oh, I got curry next week, and I'll just in that cycle. And it helped me get through
yeah,
them 8 weeks. I did it, but it just messes you mentally, where he's constantly thinking about that food. I was eating a very restricted diet. So I think, like I said,
yeah,
his terminology is very important to that performance diet
yeah,
rather than naughty sort of terminology.
yeah. It's like it really is about reframing it. Um, and yeah, if you're hating a diet, it's probably not right for you. Like if
Yeah,
every single day of it is just grind, it's you could probably be being a bit more flexible.
yeah,
Like even if it's making a healthier curry and only having half a naan, or
yeah,
having slightly less rice, as long as it fits in with your training goals, fine. Just like, just do that. Or like I said, have a pizza, but like take some of the cheese off the pizza. I'm not
yeah,
gonna. I don't want to ban anyone from having food, because, like yourself, previously, before I got into nutrition and when I wasn't a runner, like I was on some seriously restrictive diets, like having a beef burger and an egg for breakfast, because
yeah,
like I didn't know what I was doing. Like
yeah, yeah.
maybe it was keto, but I think I was like had a mixture of about 4 or 5 different diets going,
Okay.
and it was just like it was just crazy. Like, but yeah, you start living for that day you can have a burrito or whatever,
Yeah,
and be
yeah.
like, yeah,
And not, I
but
remember one
yeah,
cheat diet was a loaf of tiger bread and jam. That's how I got. I was a cheat meal. I just went. I want tiger bread, and bought a whole loaf from Morrison's, and just got some jam and enjoyed it. It was amazing. That was because I was eating
yeah,
like the same meal like every day. Um,
yeah,
but you don't really realize how much you like food until you stop eating food, which is kind
oh
of
no,
that's kind of
yeah,
the benefit of it, is you really enjoy these sort of these days, but the next 6 days and 23 hours you're hating life. But
yeah,
yeah, so moving on to from there to kind of a lean bulking, which is the kind of very
yeah,
popular phrase at the moment. Is what everyone, all these bodybuilders are promoting lean bulking, and they all have different sort of definitions of what it kind of is. Um, Now, from a performance point of view, lean bulking is going to always be the goal, because you can't get players putting on 10 kg in 4 weeks, so weeks, 2 months, because that's going to get a lot of excess fat,
yeah,
and kind of will hinder their performance. So you'd think in reality that the gold standard of lean bulking should come from sport, because we've been doing it for years now is so the question is one, how can it be done? And two, to what extreme can it be done? And then three, like some tips on doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, you raised a good point where if you're going to be trying to bulk in more of a clean way, you can't expect massive amounts of progress really quickly.
Yeah.
The starting point, just adding extras onto each meal. So each meal you add an extra protein source, probably a bit more carbohydrate as well.
Yeah.
So even if that means that there are multiple smaller components to a meal, say for breakfast, if you usually have eggs on a bagel, you have a little side, if you like, where you have a good portion of Greek yogurt with some granola, some honey, and some seeds. Like just increasing the size of the meals a bit more.
Yeah.
So I saw some advice that was to like add an extra cupped handful of carbohydrates per meal.
Okay.
And add an extra thumb-sized portion of fats per meal. So like the good fats we spoke about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like oils, nuts, things like that. So even say for dinner, if you feel like you're having fairly big dinner anyway, and you have just like a thumb-sized portion of nuts with that, that's probably going to like nearly be a couple of hundred calories just in those nuts. And like you're sticking to whole foods, it's still going to seem like a sort of healthy bulk, clean bulk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, just even if you do include it in the same meal rather than adding little bits to like little sides to meals, if you're having bolognese and you just put like another cupped handfuls worth of carbs in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if you're not a massive eater, you probably won't notice how much you've increased the portion by
Yeah.
too much.
Like I said, with that, I know a lot of people do go straight to add another meal, or they
Yeah,
blow all their extra calories in one meal. They'll add like an extra 500 calories in the breakfast, and it will just ruin them for the day. So again, like that little and often
yeah,
approach, it makes more natural.
yeah, yeah. So I feel like rather than treating it as like an activity that you've got to do, like I remember when we used to speak about bulking, it was always like bulking season,
Yeah. Yeah.
going on a bulk, like that sort of stuff, which might be necessary. But I mean, if you want to maintain that higher weight, you're going to have to get used to eating more food anyway.
Yeah.
So if you put on the muscle, you won't be able to maintain it by eating less calories, probably,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
unless you like really dialed in with the amount of protein you're having, and that's not necessarily going to work for everyone anyway. So just getting used to eating slightly larger meals across the day, and just finding ways to get more calories in. Like I said, putting portions of oil on vegetables, or like drizzling a bit of oil over potatoes or rice, pasta, that sort of stuff. It's those sort of changes that add a good amount of calories, but you won't
Notice
notice
them.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like sesame oil on veg is great.
Yeah.
Like
So good.
I would do that by choice. So it's
Yeah.
like it's a great one to get in there. And even little swaps. So like if you think about the reverse of what someone would probably do if they were trying to lower their body fat or lower their body weight, just whereas if you're trying to lose weight, you'd go for like a lower fat yogurt, go for like full fat Greek yogurt,
Yeah.
whole milk, that sort of thing. So yeah, even if I keep harping back on this point, but if you're going to find it easier probably if you don't feel like the overall amount of food is changing very much.
Yeah.
And then just looking at your snacks, like making sure you're including protein-based snacks throughout the day, making sure you are snacking,
Yeah.
because Like a lot, I wouldn't be able to live without snacking, like on healthy stuff, of course.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, a lot of athletes, a lot of exercises just don't do it. And like, no, you can make the most of it,
No,
particularly if your goal is to put on like
yeah,
lean
yeah.
mass.
That's great. So again, I'm not going to keep you too much longer. The last sort of question is more for sort of professionals out there.
Yeah,
Is a two-part question.
yeah,
Is where do you see nutritionists' role in elite sports in the future? I know in the now we've got consultants and some of the like NFL. I think maybe the English teams may have nutritionists, and you have
yeah.
obviously the roles you do with the English Institute, and there's a British Athletics, was it?
It's TAS and British Athletics.
Yeah, yeah. So the things they're already progressing. Where do you see yourself in the future? Is it more of a staple role? But yeah,
Yeah, I'd say it will become more of a staple role if funding changes. Um, I feel like it's still a fairly new field. So I feel like nutritionists are still proving their ground that they do need to be integrated in clubs, rather than just leaving it up to the strength coaches and
yeah,
to give the nutrition advice. Um, I know that the nutritionist role is still often a lower paid role within the club. So that's when you might still find nutritionists working on more of a consultancy basis
yeah,
where like they've still got, but then the issue with that is they've got such limited access to players.
yeah. So it's kind
So
of
they,
they're not progressing because they're not there, and then
yeah,
they
so
kind of
it's,
don't. Yeah,
I don't know, I don't want to make everything seem like a money problem, but like without paying people, you won't have as much access to players because
yeah,
they won't be able to put the time into it, and then they won't get the trust of the players or of the club. So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like it is really hard. Um, Not just saying it because I'm from the position, from the profession, but I do feel like it should be a role. Um, but I don't know. Maybe it needs to be combined with, say, or in some clubs combined with a like a sports scientist role. So
yeah,
if someone's able to, they do things like testing, like I don't know what kind of testing, like even if it's just body composition stuff,
yeah,
or if they can do basic physiological testing. Say like in an endurance team, you might do blood lactate profiles, VO2 max, that kind of thing, if they've got access to that sort of kit. Um, but yeah, it's hard.
No,
It's really,
I get what
it's
you
hard
mean.
to sum it up. It's really hard to sum it up.
So that 2 points from me is I know that a lot of S&C coaches, a lot of them think they know it all. So they think because they see nutrition as the macros and post
Yeah,
game, pre game supplements. That's pretty much what they see nutrition
yeah,
as. So it's kind of we're in our profession still trying to justify our position in the club. So to then outsource nutrition from an S&C coach point of view, I can see why a lot of them do get defensive because that's another snippet
yeah,
what what we add. So I can see that's quite kind of, and when the person who's going to hire a nutritionist will probably be the head of performance. I can see why,
yeah,
but like you say, I think you're going to have to start mixing roles. I saw one podcast on about sleep, and he was a sports scientist, and he's moved towards a sleep scientist now. So I think there could be an
yeah,
opportunity for nutritionists because nutrition is very linked with sleep, is to maybe progress into
yeah.
that role. Um,
No, I agree. No, I do agree. Yeah, it's difficult. It also depends, I think, on like the expertise of the players or the expertise of the club or something, or or what do I mean? Like the playing level of the club or the organization. Um, like sometimes you can make massive traction with a club just by doing some nutrition talks throughout the year.
yeah,
Um, there's one club I've worked with where I just gave the players a talk every few months, like did a few of their body comps, worked with a few of them individually, but just the players that were highlighted as needing more support. And then that seemed to sort of percolate through the club in a more positive way. And they all started adopting the behaviors that I was talking to only a few of the players about, and that I was covering in those like hour-long talks that I was doing. And then that coupled with talking to the chef at the club, which made the provision after training sessions and after matches slightly better in terms of nutrition. And then talking to the coach, so making sure that they were using batch tested supplements.
Yeah.
And making sure it was the right kind of supplements, like even things like using a recovery blend supplement rather than just protein powder to refuel these guys. So yeah, it is tricky. Like some sports and some clubs for sure should have a full-time nutritionist, just because it to me it just makes sense. But yeah,
do you feel
with
that
other clubs you can make massive traction with less, so yeah, it's difficult. What question were you gonna ask?
do you feel that by not dumbing it down or simplifying it, but working with the nutrition with the chefs or just these little talks, do you feel that this is kind of the best of a bad situation, or do you feel that this kind of not dumbs down what you actually offer, but simplifies it too much, where people just see nutrition as the meal prep rather than everything we spoke about before, but the lifestyle changes, the habits? And again, I said, is it just the best of a bad situation at the moment, or is it something that maybe we're using to prove yourselves to then later kind of progress into a more of a full-time role?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, like you say, kind of proving your worth
Yeah,
with the players, particularly because if they feel like you know what you're on about and that you are actually making a difference, that's going to run like a grain through the whole club and sort of start fostering that respect for nutrition. But yeah, I do see the argument that it's perfectly all right to just use consultants in some scenarios, because what am I saying? Like some clubs, I feel like you could feel like you were wasting their resources, if you
yeah,
like. It depends on the cohort of players you've got, but there might not necessarily be a need to sit down with every member of the squad once a week.
yeah,
And for particularly the players that are more tuned in with nutrition anyway, have them tell you the same information, similar sorts of diet. So you feel like you're just regurgitating the same
yeah, of
advice
course, yeah,
week in, week out. So for those sort of clubs, not that you can profile clubs like that, but yeah, they might do better with a consultant role or like a nutritionist role tied in with a sports scientist role. But yeah, it's tough. Like team sports, I feel like could benefit from it full time. I would say some endurance sports, say like cycling, where the plans need to be so rigid for what they're doing with
yeah,
nutrition. Like obviously it has to be so scientific that they need to have one. But then like professional running teams, there aren't that many in this country, but I'd say that they are fine just using consultants,
yeah. I
just
think
because
one of the ways in which a nutrition should be used in teams, like you said before, is the consultancy. But if you work rather than as S&C, you're going to have like a first team S&C, a second team academy, all the way down. I think nutritionists could be more of a a full team S&C, where you do maybe just
yeah,
booking appointments as like a consultant with the first team. And then as you go more and more down, when you need more and more advice, you do a weekly thing or a bi-weekly or once a month thing with different age groups. You could rotate through the age groups maybe. That way, I think that would work really well. I know I've worked for clubs where they've done, like I said, month every now and again done nutrition toppers. But I feel that by not having one or a consultant, a lot of players may feel too nervous to message the consultant. I've had to go and
definitely.
speak to players as an S&C coach and ask them about their nutrition rather than coming to me. Some do, but a lot of players, once digging in, I've found things out where I think that whereas having a set essence nutritionist where they can go to, at least offers that pathway.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, it's about having the provision. I would say that even if it's not a full-time role or not even a part-time role, even if it is just a consultant, like I feel like any decent standard of club should have someone on their books.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's
or like have a contact, because you don't want a player that is highlighted that really needs something doing with their nutrition.
Yeah,
particularly if it's health related, and be sort of fishing around for a decent consultant. Like you should have someone that you're aware of.
Yeah, like I said, I think most most good S&C coaches do have a basic understanding of nutrition, of how to gain weight, lose weight, what we kind of should be eating. But like I said, whenever I have a problem that I'm not comfortable with, I come straight to you. As I guess it's you need like you would come to me for training, or someone you know for training. You need that kind of next level, and I think once S&C coaches realize that we are flawed, the same way as a physio, we go to a physio for an injury, we should be going to nutritionists for these kind of like niche or issues.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
No, but again, you've been great. So we'll finish it
Cool.
there.
Thanks,
Where
mate.
can people find you? LinkedIn, Instagram.
Yeah, LinkedIn, Christian Smith. Instagram, I'm Christian Smith Nutrition. And Twitter, I believe I am C Smith Nutrition. So yeah, hit me up on there. I don't post a lot of content at the moment, but I'm trying to get back on it.
And he's promised me he would, so I'm sure if he gives me a follow, he'll give me an urge to post some more content. But no, thanks for coming on, and I
That's all right.
look
Yeah,
forward
thanks
to
for having me.
seeing you soon.